going to go on the citizenship in the VUCA. You see the outline. I will introduce the subject with the concept you know well of VUCA world, and to come back on the idea of citizenship, to say something on that. Then to move to the models of governance. I will explain 6 mutations impacting governance because we are doing foresight. And then to develop a model linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030, and then a short conclusion that I call to achieve harmony. You know that harmony is very important in sustainable development. That's a link with the other lesson, because harmony is the way to balance the system with the improving the different subsystems and variables inside it. When we developed the idea of VUCA world, you know that's Warren Bennis and Bert Nenus who talk about that in the early 80s. They talk about volatility as the nature, the dynamics, the speed of changes. They talk about uncertainty as the lack of predictability, the well-known difficulty to anticipate in the current world, the prospect for wildcard, for surprises, the difficulty to understand the past, the senses, and the ultimate aims of the world we are tackling with. And then complexity, I talked about that last time, that the interactive, interdependent, and we call retroactive links between the objects, the concept, the different and the different part of the systems. And probably the most important of this VUCA world is the question of ambiguity. That's a well-known question in foresight, the haziness of reality, the confusion we have when we see different objects, different variables, different ideas, mostly the difficulty to name them, and the use of different approaches, the different definition that make the people, even when they are talking together, didn't understand or doesn't understand themselves about the subject they are talking at that moment. Talking about citizenship, and I took here just a picture coming from the Association for Citizenship Teaching in UK to show the complexity of the idea of citizenship linked to democracy. Here is for teaching, but you see the different subsystems of this link between democracy and citizenship. You have variables as the parliamentary democracy, the rule of laws, the political system, executive, legislative, the voting question with the election, the representation and accountability, and the role of the members of the parliament, the right of the minorities, the right of the women, the equal citizenships, the free media, the role and responsibility of the media, the freedom of speech of this kind of media, but also of the citizen, the influencing change, the democratic skills, the capacity to deliberate, the critical literacy, the local democracy was the different, what they called in Europe, the multi-level governance, the question of the young people, the age of voting, the opportunity for participation in politics and inside the schools, and the responsibility to political issues and event question issues appearing. We are in UK, but that's a huge question of the Brexit, you know. So all the question linked to the implication of the citizens in the democracy. And I will consider citizenship as democratic participation, not public sphere, but in common, what I call in collective policies, also collective conception, very linked to the concept of governance, as it is used by the United Nations. And I will come back on the second part on that question. When we try to work on that question of the definition of citizenship, that's very hard, we know, because there are different philosophical conceptions and huge difference when you come back to John Locke, Hobbes, for example, or the French Rousseau. The approaches are very, very different. But that's not the path I will go on. Perhaps just try to define the concept of citizenship by the way of sociology, because you know that it's increasingly used in a non-legal sense. It then refers to the way in which residents of democratic countries use their rights to participate in decisions relating to public life, to enter the political debate, and to contribute to democratic dynamics inside the country. And perhaps you know Dominique Schnapper, who is a great French sociologist. She's the daughter of the great philosopher Raymond Aron. And she said that citizenship is both the source of the social bond and the principle of political legitimacy. Citizenship is in the name of the common citizenships that members of a democratic society can have a set of rights and duties, and that these rights and duties allow them to make a society beyond all their difference and all their inequalities. This way to live together, that this living together is both the condition and the consequence of this citizenship. There must be between the human beings in the same society a minimum of mutual trust by which women and men establish bonds and can live together. And this is the consequence of citizenship, since they affirm that all citizens have the same rights and the same duties, and that it's by this principle that they can live in a human way and they can live together. Moving to the question of foresight, the link for me is the link between policy design to democracy. And I present here a model I like very much, also written by John Dreisel in the 19th and presented in many books. He is a professor at Oxford University. He was involved in some huge work in political science and also synthesis, interesting synthesis. For example, if you see this huge book, interesting one, is the Oxford Handbook of Public Policy. And he chaired such a work, the Oxford Handbook of Deliberative Democracy. So he is very informed about this question. There are, we know, many other forces in the landscape of democracy that are not only policy design, can have other forces that affect democratic enterprise, such as interest groups, political parties, leadership, press, and also the implication of the citizen, of the organization, of the networks, many variables inside it. But here we are talking about the consequences of public policies on democracy. And by the way, after I will move on the way that citizens could contribute to policy design through, for example, foresight, but we know that we are very interested with that question. So you see in orange here that the democratic governance is in a large part striving to expand the franchise, the scope and the authenticity of franchise refers to the numbers of participants in any political setting. Scope concerns the domains of life under democratic public control. And authenticity is the degree to which democratic control is substantive, is informed, and competency engaged. So what we try to show that how policies address the condition of democracy. If you move to the red part, the third set of boxes, you will see the critical condition to democracy or for democracy. There need to be open arenas to public discourse in which all, and the first box, all relevant points of view are expressed. Citizens ought to view their role as citizens as important, as involving obligation as well as right, and they must be convinced that government has the interest and capacity to solve public problems, and especially to solve their own problems. Citizens themselves should be supportive of policies and positively involved in producing shared goals, so that citizen engagement and support to policies. And there must be means to all government accountable for this action that the box about accountability. These important conditions for democracy are directly related to consequences flowing from policy design. That's the green part and the second set of box. The framing of issues, the social construction of targets, the structure of implementation and delivery structures, delivery systems, the transparency of governmental actions, and citizen access to information. So you see that the model can show how policies could impact democracy and what could be the role or the place of citizens at the middle of the chart in that system. I've put a double arrow on the model in the right of the slide, because the conceptors of the model said that the recursivity is possible. So you can move from one side to another. Here in that model, you see that the movement comes from policy design, moving to consequence flowing from policy design, moving to critical condition, and then going to the use of democracy. That's what I just explained, that the work we have done, we are doing with our policy lab on the model of the European Policy Lab. And here is a picture of the citizen panel with the government, the first minister and the minister of aging on the left, the president of the parliament, and myself on the middle, and some of the 30 citizens involved in the foresight process, and we are there inside the commission of the parliament. So this point was to introduce the question of the VUCA world and the citizenships, and I moved to the models of governance. I don't want to write the history. You will see the slide by yourself if you want. But the idea of governance is very important, very interesting, because it's very linked to the civil society. You see here in 1991, the Club of Rome launched a report called The First Global Revolution. And inside that work of two of the creator of the Club of Rome, Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, they define the terms of governance as a command mechanism of a social system that endeavors to provide prosperity, coherence, order, continuity in the systems. And they said that it could be applied in democratic or even in authoritarian with different approaches, and to improve the way there are rules. And this kind of methodology were used at that moment in many people in Africa, for example, where there were authoritarian government. And the idea was to provide stability between the various centers of power. And they said that could be used in companies, it could be used in local or national government, could be used in fields like military, education, and so on. So that even they said in family, that's quite strange, but we can imagine in large family. The guy who was the best to talk about the process of governance for me was Stephen Russell, a Canadian. He passed away last year. Was a guy who wrote a book called Governing in an Information Society. And he defined governments as a process in which the different parts of the society, the different spheres of the society, stir themselves and insist on the importance of the coordination, of the communication, of the control, and saying that, and that's very important, not to disqualify the government, but to say that the government is at the middle of the process, is first actor, the organizer of the process, who could move together private sector, the state and also the civil society. This methodology was used by the UNDP, the agency who advocates for change and connects country to knowledge, experience, and resources, who help make cooperation to development. And they use a definition that is very, very close to the two first one that I gave you. And many other organizations at the worldwide, I give two examples. The World Bank, for example, was one. You could also think to the white paper of the European Commission. You see that this kind of definition that's very close. This white paper was really important. Organized first the work of the European Commission, but they organize what they call directive at the different. All the European countries use this kind of process inside their own countries. And also many people support by the World Bank. The OECD also developed this idea of governance. And you see in different countries, here is that for UK, governance and public policies, the idea of a description or changing nature of the process in recent decades, and the idea of involving the different actors, going through the idea that also many sociologists insist on. I think someone like Michel Crozier in France, that you cannot move the system if you don't move the different actors of the systems. And so governance is a way to make transformation of the system. That's why we use the idea that foresight is a tool of governance, a tool able to make move the different parts of governance and make move all the different way. The idea here, coming from Lester Salomon, is that we are moving from a paradigm to another. The ancient paradigm, you know, that is classical public administration with program agency. Here we have new tools, and foresight is a new model of changing. We're in a model organized through hierarchy. Here you are networks. You were in the model where public and private were opposing. We are now in a model where public and private should cooperate with the same ultimate aims. And for example, the responsibility, social responsibility of the companies could help that make them be in countries, in a world of command and control. And we are now in a world when we are trying to build consensus through negotiation and persuasion. Perhaps except Mr. Trump, that's another question. We were in a question of management of skills, and we are now in a world of enablement of skills. And we are moving from the Weberian bureaucratic state to a kind of postmodern state. And in that postmodern state, governance is a key element, but working with government, putting government inside the governance, and going from hierarchy going to a positive sum and not a zero-sum game, but positive sum game, going from a kind of pluralist approach and not elitist approach, not a concentrate power, but a diffuse power among the different actors, not in a world of centralization, but a world of decentralization, not a world, perhaps in some, except in some countries, it was the conversation before of strong and central executive, but the people and going through persuasion in their involvement of the different actors and saying, come with me and no, go on that way. That's all the difference between the two models. Not in a model of clear lines of accountability, but with a fuzzy lines of accountability where the question of responsibility is not so clear. I often take the example of Turkey for Europe. The relationship of Turkey is very complex and not in a state central control, but a state central steering. So this is really an important change. And what is the added value of the UNDP in that new model of governance is really to try to facilitate the relationship between the different spheres, the different circles of the society through the well-known model now of public sector, civil society, private sector, and probably the question of foresight inside the triangle between the red, green, and blue lines. There you have foresight with this capacity to make the people work together and to gather the people to try to build common vision and common strategy. That's what I want to say about the governance, but you could complex the model. That's what was done with by the Commonwealth Secretariat. They took the UNDP model of the three sphere, but they said that they are different, and they said 7, but when I count, there are more and more than 7 part of the relationship, the types of relation in a complex term of governance, the relationship between local government and inhabitants, government and voluntary or private sector, legislative and executive, nation-state and international institutions, companies and judicial, companies and citizens, and so on. So that's very complex, but we have to deal, that was what we said in the beginning, we have to deal with that complexity and try to resolve the ambiguity by make the people talk with themselves and with the other kind of people. Perhaps to add about the term of resilience, that there are 2 ways to see resilience. One way is to consider that's resistance. So to try to support or to be as strong as able to receive hurt. And the other way to consider resilience is the capacity to tackle with issues. And I think that the second definition is more useful, because the capacity to answer to the issues is a kind of mobility and not a kind of static definition. I think that's important also to say that. About the sixth mutation impacting governance, I will come back on the three circles or spheres, the two words are there, of governance, saying that the key actors may be outside the nation, because you could imagine many actors, and you know there are many variables impacting from outside. So they are each time in and out interaction for each countries. You know, for Brazil also the relationship with the United States, with Europe, and so on. The importance of the great international companies, the geopolitical issues at the worldwide level. All these questions are very important. But my point is to see the different mutation impacting governance. The first one is just putting that here, if possible, is the knowledge revolution. You all know that there is a trajectory from information, digital, knowledge, civilization, society, and so on. Many people are saying each time to each 5 years that we have a new technological revolution, a new change. But in fact, that's the same movement from the 60s, from Daniel Bell analysis about the post-industrial society. We are in the same mood. What is important about the question of governance is the elevation of the intellectual level of the citizens, and the number of intellectual persons who engage in critical thinking, research, and reflection about the society, and who propose solutions for the different problems. I see, and that we hear about the perverse effect of social medias, of new tools, and so on. But in fact, what is very important, that the people improve themselves through new knowledge they discover each day, and also they engage themselves in giving opinion. Or sometimes the opinion are quite rude, are quite quickly elaborated, but it's important that the people are involving themselves in the different issues, and I think that's very important. If you take the idea of climate change, some people are against, some people are pro, but in fact what is important, that the engagement of people. And I think that that general elevation of intellectual level is changing the world. The second mutation is the fact that through that trajectory, we have decided together since years, and we talk about the Club of Rome. It was a pioneer in that field, but now there are many organizations talking about sustainable development. You have the implementation of the 2030 agenda by the United Nations to build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And that's very important to have that, because that's a really engine of moving the world. The third mutation is the new social trifunctionality. That's just what we have shown. The recognition of the actors and stakeholders that promoting by international institutions. And that's the idea that from Aristotle to the feudality, to the French Revolution, or the creation of the modern world, you have this kind of social functionality, and that could help people to understand. I showed it about the governance, a new model, the relationship between the different spheres of society. And then, and that's more modern, the open government. It was the ideas carried by Tony Blair, Obama, Emmanuel Macron, and some of the people, a citizen-centered culture of governance that utilize innovative and sustainable tools, policy, and practices to promote government transparency, responsiveness, accountability, to foster stakeholder participation in support of democracy, inclusive growth. These initiatives are very important, and you have this kind of model of open government. You have the Open Government Partnership. They were in Ottawa last month for a worldwide conference about this idea of transparency, of participation, and co-construction, co-building of the policies with the people, with the companies, with the administration, with the universities. And that's very important, that idea of open government. And I think that that's probably one of the hope for the future. However, you have also a contra driver, what I call conservative and populist zeitgeist. The protectionism in the economy is world affair, nativism without a society, said Tony Blair, all in the end mean weakness in our common challenges. These are the effects of populism, which question the legitimacy of elected officials, which mistrust the parliamentary regime, which with the denunciation of financial oligarchy that would organize the world and so on. And you have all these issues with the idea of fake news, of hoax, and so on. And I name the President Trump, which is a representative of this zeitgeist. But we have some also in Europe, and there are some also in Latin America, and or in Africa and Asia. The last point, and I think that's a very positive one. I just said some word about that, answering one of the questions, is the increased influence of company. The recognition of the role of the companies in the governance, considering that they have been the engine that the United Nations, who said that, behind the growth, the unprecedented growth of the past centuries, raise billions of people from poverty, and to unlock the human potential of innovation and creativity. And the cooperation between the citizens and the company, the idea that I just stressed on that of the social involvement of the companies, and in the field of climate change and sustainability, they are very good allies. I think that these mutations are on the field, and they will help to go away the pessimism we could have, and that's what Tony Blair said in a speech to the Trade Union Congress in 2006. I think that's a great idea he had when he said that what has changed in the interplay between globalization, immigration, and terrorism, suddenly we feel under threat physically from the new terrorism that is coming onto our street culturally as new wave of migrants change our society, and economical because an open world economy is hastening the sharpness of competition. And this world, this changing world, we could see and go away the pessimism to try, that's what he said, to answer positively to economic globalization and to open the borders, to exchange with the people, and to have also an open society. And you see that this change, new social functionality, sustainable development, knowledge, revolution, have such an impact. And I try to describe this impact. And the conclusion was that we should have a circle, a sphere inside the model, the twin-functional model of governments, and the importance of academia. Because in fact, academia are not, university research center are not in the model. We could consider that they are part of the state because they are receiving support from the state in order to pay the teachers and so on. They are part of the civil society because they have what we call the academic liberty of speech. But they are also part of the private sector because generally people in the university, I do the same also, have also the ability to give advice, to go to the market and try to answer to tenders, for example. But in fact, we can consider they have a special part because of the knowledge society and because of the open government. The effect of the sustainable development is great also on the state part, you see also in the private sectors. I just said that many companies are very aware of the changes linked to the sustainable development, and many companies are considering there are many market opportunities through sustainable development. The impact of conservative and populist zeitgeist is mostly on the state sphere at this moment. The impact of open government try to moderate that zeitgeist, and you have the increased influence of companies on the sphere of the state. What you could do, what I did, but I did it quickly, but you could do it for Brazil, is to try to see what are the impact of the 6 mutations, the 6 change in progress through the different actors of governance in Brazil. What is the impact of knowledge revolution on the state sphere? What is the impact of sustainable development on the civil society? What the impact of the open government or the conservative and populist zeitgeist on the private sector, what the impact of the increased influence of companies on research centers and university. I move on. So I don't want to go through the different work. I did it quite quickly, but so you can see how you could adapt it to your country with different approaches. My answer here are very general, but to show the impact about the impact of sustainable development on the sphere of civil society. We define it most fiscal to achieve sustainability, for example, in different way of mobility or things like that. But I want to move to the agenda 2030. The agenda, the question of the agenda 2030 was linked to the work of the Committee of Experts on Public Administration of the United Nations, and we are a member of the ECOSOC of the United Nations, and I had the opportunity to work with them in New York in last April. And we work on the principle of effective government for sustainable development. And we begin to stress on the question of the effectiveness, putting in evidence the question of the competence to perform the function effectively of the institution through sufficient expertise, sufficient resource, sufficient tools to deal accurately with the issues that we should tackle. The effectiveness is linked also to the policy making, how to achieve their intended result with public policies, to be coherent with one another, or full accordance with fact, reason, and good sense. That's a point also. The question of collaboration, how to address problem of common interest at the different levels of government. I talk about multi-level governance, and I think that's very important to go through these ideas. About the important question of accountability, we talk 3 or 4 times of data accountability in the different model I have the opportunity to present. You have there integrity, transparency, independent oversight to return trust in government. I think that's a point also. You have also the principle of inclusiveness, with the question of leaving no one behind, to ensure that all the human beings are part of the process, are part of the path of the country, of the world, at the worldwide level, with dignity, equality, and have public policy that address the question of poverty and of the vulnerable people. Non-discrimination, we all know that the importance of this question of respect, protect and promote the human right. The question of the principle of effective governments to sustainable development through participation. So to have an effective state, all significant political groups should be actively involved in matters that directly affect them and have a chance to influence policy. I think a point like this is very important for foresight. That's an argument to say, you see, the United Nations is insisting of the fact that we should involve the different people inside the co-building, co-construction of the policies of a state, and not only have a hierarchical way to work. Subsidiarity in Europe, we use that idea that very important idea, the idea of promoting government that is responsive to the needs and aspiration of all people, and that in a work of federalism, to try to tackle the problem at the level they are lying, and not from the top of the state to achieve local problem. Local problem should be addressed at the local level. That's very important, I think, to have that idea. And the fifth question of effective governance is the intergenerational equity to promote prosperity and quality of life, to have the gender question also linked to that question. I want to move to the last idea of the presentation, is the idea that to achieve harmony is to move to a worldwide view, because harmony is not at the national level. That is also at the national level, that is also at the local level, but it is also at the worldwide level. So to achieve harmony, this idea of democracy requires first rationality, and two, organizational methodology, with what we used to do in foresight, that mutual adjustment in developing policies between the different actors, with the citizens, with the politician. And to do that, we should, that's what you are doing now, tackle on education and training, because they are fundamental and they are the basis of sustainability. This was just a last conclusion, but to remind you that there is no harmony without sustainability, and in complexity we define harmony as the balance of the different subsystems, as presented by the Club of Rome of other of the Brundtland definition of sustainability.